Hey everybody, I'm Dan Pierce and welcome to the Cut Block. It's election season here in Canada. We've got a federal election going on right now. So I'm going to be doing a bit of a deep dive into the two main party candidates that are running for prime minister right now. And in this video, we're going to be looking at the Liberal leader, Mark Carney, who is also the current Prime Minister of Canada, having taken over from Justin Trudeau when he stepped down. And we're not going to be looking at the Liberal platform just yet. I'm going to do that in a separate video. But for now, we're just going to be talking about Mark Carney as a person, a little bit about his track record, his accomplishments, some of his shady business dealings, just to get a sense of who he is, what he's all about, and what he would be like as Prime Minister. And on this channel, we have a focus on climate change and environmental issues and resource policies. So we're not really going to be talking about housing or healthcare or anything like that, but what it would mean for the environment if Mark Carney gets elected Prime Minister. So without further ado, let's get into it. So just to start off, we'll just do a quick scroll through his Wikipedia page, just do a little bit of a bio. Mark Carney is definitely an egghead. He graduated with a degree in economics from Harvard University, studied at Oxford University, where he earned a master's degree and a doctorate. He's held various roles at Goldman Sachs. Before joining the Bank of Canada as deputy governor in 2003. And in 2007, Carney was named governor of the Bank of Canada, where he was responsible for Canadian monetary policy during the 2008 financial crisis. And that was really where he made his name, is what he really helped Canada weather the 2008 financial crisis better than most. And Canada was able to recover from that recession faster than most other G7 nations. And Mark Carney was largely credited with helping Canada weather that storm. So that was where a lot of people got to know the name Mark Carney. I feel like a lot of people in the United States were envious, wishing they had a Mark Carney. And I know people like, my parents really appreciated the work that he did in that time. And so this is a guy who he's no dummy. He knows what he's doing. He's an experienced economist. And so after stepping down as governor of the Bank of Canada, he then went on to he was then appointed as the governor of the Bank of England, where he led the British bank's response to Brexit and the early phase of the COVID-19 pandemic. So again, this guy has experience weathering all kinds of crises in high-level positions. He understands the global financial system. He understands economics. And so he's probably one of the most qualified people who's ever run for prime minister in this country. I know that's not everything. I feel like values are a huge part of what it also takes to be a good prime minister. But in terms of his experience and his qualifications, they are undeniable. After leaving central banking, Carney served as chair and head of impact investing at Brookfield Asset Management and as chair of the board of directors for Bloomberg LP. And he was also appointed the United Nations Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance. And at COP26 in Glasgow, Carney helped launch the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, also called GFANZ. He acted as the group's co-chair. And let me just scroll over to GFANZ here. So GFANZ was a group that formed during COP26 at Glasgow and describes itself as a global coalition of leading financial institutions committed to accelerating the decarbonization of the economy. So Mark Carney's life after being a central banker and after working in finance, he really has been a champion for climate action, at least at the financial level. So I'll talk a little bit about this. He really is a believer in climate change and that it is a crisis, that we need to work to address it. So basically, this organization, I believe it had good intentions, and I believe Mark Carney has good intentions. But by the looks of it, the actual banks and institutions that were getting involved in this project, this GFANZ project, were really only doing it to basically greenwash their operation and say, look at us, we're acting on climate change, when really they weren't taking strong actions to meet the pledges that they had made. And as soon as the organization tried to put binding proposals on the table, some of the biggest banks like JP Morgan and Bank of America tried to pull out of it, right? So they were like, oh, don't worry, none of this is binding, right? So a lot of this GFAN stuff kind of reeks of, just greenwashing the financial sector. I don't know if that's Mark Carney's intent here. Maybe he's fully aware of what he's doing, or maybe he's just incredibly naive and thought that these big banks would actually go along with it. I would side with the latter. He strikes me as someone who's well-intentioned, but a little bit naive about the world that he's operating in. But, who am I to say? So let's take a look at this article here in The Nation magazine. Is Mark Carney a climate radical? What hasn't yet gotten much press attention are Carney's views about climate change and fossil fuels, which are commendably grounded in science but carry radical political and economic implications. Over the past decade, Carney has repeatedly stated that the vast majority of Earth's remaining reserves of oil, gas, and coal must be left in the ground unburned, because burning them would risk a catastrophic overheating of the planet. The world's climate scientists have been saying exactly that with increasing urgency for years, but leaving most fossil fuels in the ground poses enormous practical challenges for Canada, one of the world's foremost producers and exporters of oil and gas. So, having watched the federal leaders debate and read through Mark Carney's and the Liberal Party's platform, I can tell you right now, there's nothing this extreme in the platform. He hasn't said anything like this on the campaign trail. And I don't think you could get elected prime minister in Canada saying this kind of stuff at this moment in time. So Mark Carney has tried to kind of have it both ways and take that center road where he acknowledges that, yes, climate change is an emergency, it's a crisis, we need to address it, but we also need to continue to develop our oil and gas, to get it to market, and use those profits to try and get off of oil and gas and continue to develop clean energy and all of that. So he's kind of taken that classic centrist, middle-of-the-road approach in terms of how he's campaigned and what their party platform is saying. So let's talk about what Mark Carney's values are. And one of the best windows into his mind palace is his 2021 book, Values. I didn't read the book, but we got a little bit of analysis from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. This is written by Mark Lee, and I'll just read a few excerpts here. He gives some good analysis of what he gleaned from Mark Carney's book, Values. At the end of its 531 pages, Carney lays out a hopeful vision for Canada, albeit one lacking a sharper focus on details. We can only conclude he is a very competent centrist whose plans for Canada won't depart much from the status quo. In the face of the second Trump administration, many will feel that's enough, but one can't help wanting more. Jumping ahead. So what are the big ideas in Values, and what does this tell us about the type of leader he would be? Carney is a strong believer in markets, but acknowledges they need to be regulated for there to be decent outcomes. In a contrast to the Milton Friedman-inspired free market views of his conservative adversary, Pierre Poilievre, Carney comments, unchecked market fundamentalism devours the social capital essential for the long-term dynamism of capitalism itself. So this is interesting. It's pretty much what I expected about Mark Carney being a centrist, about him believing in markets, but believes that they should be well regulated rather than just allowed to run amok. And the quote from the book is, unchecked market fundamentalism devours the social capital essential for the long-term dynamism of capitalism itself. And to me, this really summarizes what liberalism is all about. It's kind of the release valve of capitalism. As conservatives and right wingers want to remove all regulation and just allow capitalism to run amok. As you do that, yes, you generate a lot of profits private profits for corporations, but you deplete the social capital that allows capitalism to exist in the first place. And what that means is, if you too much unchecked capitalism, unfettered capitalism, and eventually the pitchforks are going to come out. And so that's why you need, that's where liberalism comes in as kind of a release valve for capitalism that sort of quells that pitchfork energy and, you know, releases a little bit of a stronger trickle in the trickle down economics to allow to flow to the people that implement some more stringent regulation to sort of calm things down and allow people to kind of go back to put the pitchforks away and go back to their, you know, to being good workers, right? So again, he's a capitalist. He believes in markets, but he doesn't believe that markets should be unchecked. He thinks capitalism needs to be well regulated in order that capitalism itself can continue to exist. Now, I also think it's worth taking a look at the shadier side of Mark Carney's background, particularly the time he spent working for Brookfield Asset Management, which is kind of a spinoff of the Brookfield Corporation. Now, I have a personal relationship with Brookfield. When I first started documenting forestry as a documentary filmmaker, one of the very first assignments that I got was I went up to Cortes Island, which is Gulf Island on the west coast of BC, to report on a proposed logging operation by a company called Island Timberlands. And they were proposing to log the last old growth forests on this tiny little island. And of course, there was a lot of local opposition. Blockades ended up ensuing. And of course, the parent company of Island Timberlands was Brookfield Asset Management. Now, of course, this was before Mark Carney became chairman of the board of Brookfield. But in any case, this is the company that Mark Carney ultimately went on to work at very senior levels in. Now, according to Wikipedia here, the Brookfield Corporation is a Canadian multinational company that is one of the world's largest investment management companies. It has over $900 billion of assets under management, and I believe that's now over $1 trillion. Brookfield is the 24th largest private equity firm in the world. So this is a massive company. And of course, Mark Carney can't be held responsible for all of the shady dealings that Brookfield has been responsible for over the years. But I will select a few examples here because he did go and work for the company. So that does say something about his values and what he cares about. A few of the other black marks on the Brookfield Asset Management portfolio here that I'd like to direct you to in this CBC article from CBC Indigenous. Carney's former firm, Brookfield, has been accused of breaching Indigenous rights in 4 countries. Carney, who is running for prime minister as Liberal leader, spent more than 4 years as vice chair and then chair at Brookfield Asset Management, where he focused on green investing and renewable energy. During that period, from 2020 to 2024, Brookfield businesses faced reports of serious human rights abuses in Brazil, Indigenous resistance in Colombia, a First Nations $100 million lawsuit in Ontario, and an environmental dispute in Maine. In Ontario, Maine, and Colombia, Brookfield owned hydroelectric dams, and one wind farm allegedly threatened Indigenous rights or damaged the environment. In Brazil, international NGO Global Witness accused Brookfield and subsidiaries of deforestation and human rights violations, including the attempted eviction of an Indigenous group and breach of anti-slave labor law in 2021. While the multinational conglomerate denied any wrongdoing, the disputes have raised questions about the former central banker and UN climate action envoy's track record. I believe that speaks for itself. Again, how much of this can be, attributed to Mark Carney, who's to say? But this is the company that he worked for, right? This is the kind of business that they're in. Any company this large that's doing this scale of business in this many countries, doing resource development, is undoubtedly going to be trampling on Indigenous rights, is going to be destroying the environment. So it's, and even like a project like a big hydroelectric dam, which is ostensibly clean energy, right, is still destroying a huge swath of land in order to flood for a hydro project. So all kinds of economic development and resource extraction takes its toll on the planet. And, the work that Mark Carney has done for Brookfield is no different. So what are the big takeaways? Mark Carney seems like he will be a highly competent, well-qualified manager of the status quo. I think in his heart of hearts, he really is more of a climate radical than he lets on. That being said, he also knows what he has to say in order to get elected in Canada, which has basically become a petro-state. He knows he can't go out there and say, we got to leave it in the ground and we got to get off fossil fuels tomorrow. And so he's taking this middle road of trying to say climate change is serious. We got to get off fossil fuels eventually. But right now, we got to keep developing our oil and gas as well as developing clean energy. And basically, we can have it all. That's the path that he's choosing to walk right now, which I think in Canada is probably the best that you can hope for. But like I said, deep down, I think Mark Carney really does understand the scope and scale of the crisis. But deep down in his heart of hearts, Mark Carney is a capitalist, but he's a centrist capitalist, which means that he believes in markets, but he believes in well-regulated markets. And ultimately, he acts as a release valve for capitalism itself so that capitalism can continue to exist. He understands that you gotta actually provide for the people. You've got to rein in the worst excesses of corporations in order that the pitchforks aren't going to come for them and that capitalism can continue to chug along. So that's my take on Mark Carney. I'm going to do another video that will be a deep dive on the liberal platform and comparing that to the conservative platform. So keep an eye out for that. And I'm also going to do another video about Pierre Poilievre, his background, and what we could potentially expect from him as a leader if he gets elected. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for tuning into the Cut Block. Don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and if you like what we're doing here, go over to Patreon and you can become a member to support our work. Thanks so much.